What he doesn't know about vampirism wouldn't fill a flea's codpiece. This is the No Fear podcast. We know what scares you. I'm Matt.
I'm Mel.
And I'm Lisa.
And this is the No Fear Cast, the podcast where we dissect horror and all the things that scare us. This is episode 12 of season 5, and we are diving into some classic Hammer horror with the movie Captain Kronos Vampire Hunter. So this episode, listeners, is a tie-in to the Monster She Wrote podcast with Lisa and myself, Mel, which has been looking at the actresses who helped make Hammer horror films. So, first off, before we get into a discussion of the movie, which we already started talking about it and laughing before we hit record, I'm going to tell a few details about it and then open it up for impressions. So this movie, Captain Kronos Vampire Hunter, is a Hammer horror movie, as I mentioned in the intro. And it came out in 1974. And not only is it a movie about vampire hunters, it's also kind of a movie about, it's kind of a pirate movie because everybody in this movie has a rapier and has amazing sword skills. And so there's lots of swashbuckling in it, including in the climax of the movie. It was written and directed by Brian Clemens, who was a relative of Mark Twain. He also wrote the movie Dr. Jekyll and Sister Hyde for Hammer, as well as lots of other TV and film, including the anthology show Thriller. This movie is starring Carolyn Monroe as one of the stars of this movie, and we actually discussed Carolyn Monroe, Lisa and I did, in the Monster She Wrote episode 28. So if you're interested in some background about her in particular, you can find it there. This movie was rated R when it came out in North America for its sex and violence. I don't know, can you rate something R for the audience possibly hurting themselves while laughing at it? I'm not sure. Lisa, Matt, I'm going to toss it over to you guys for your impressions of this movie.
To sum up my impression, as I said in our kind of pre-recording brief discussion of this movie, I kept waiting for Crow and Tom Servo and the rest of the gang to show up at the bottom of my screen. And for those of you that don't get that reference, it's Mystery Science Theater 3000. This movie had this would have fit in perfectly into an MST3K episode. It was cheesy. It was laughable. It was it was all around. There was a lot of what in God's name is happening and why is this happening. I don't want to completely throw it to the wolves though and say that it was just a completely terrible movie, because I made my wife watch this with me while I was watching it for the podcast, and afterwards we kind of briefly discussed our impressions of it. And I did say to her then, as I'm saying now, that one thing that I think it did do well is it did have a sort of twist to the ending that I did not expect and that I thought was well set up and well earned. The getting to that point was a up and down roller coaster of, oh my goodness, what is happening though? Because there is a lot of nonsense. Well, I don't want to say nonsense, but it's a cheesy horror movie, but also there's a lot of what is going on and why is this happening to it as well. But I think overall, I did enjoy it. I would much prefer to watch it probably with like a beer in my hand and a group of people to laugh at it with. But my wife and I did laugh at it a lot, just ourselves in our sober states.
Yeah. This movie, I will say this, it was a terrible movie. It was a terrible movie. But if you're looking, there are really good Hammer movies out there. Like, there are Hammer movies that I genuinely enjoy sitting down and watching as good films. This one, however, is more, it's like if you want something that definitely has the Hammer feel to it, but is something that's so bad that you can sit down with your friends and just like have a lot of fun watching a bad movie, this is probably a really good choice for that. And Matt, I think you hit the nail right on the head when you said this felt like a mystery science theater movie that I'm surprised they haven't done this one yet, because it was all over the place. I mean, one thing, I think the setting was fun. A lot of these Hammer films have these like very vague, like European village sets. So it's hard to place like the time or the exact space they're in, except it's a village somewhere in Europe, and there's probably a castle, and there's probably a tavern, and there's probably a cottage or two. And this one was like that. It opened really bizarre. Like what got me about this movie, and I'm sure we'll talk about this whole thing, is that I felt like every 20 minutes I was watching a different film. So like it opens and there are these girls like sitting in this wood, in this forest, you know, with these, there's all these flowers and green trees, and they're brushing their hair, looking in a mirror for some reason in the middle of the woods, and talking about how like vanity is a sin. And I think this is supposed to set up the theme of the movie, because then one of the girls who is looking into the mirror gets attacked by this like mysterious man who we know, probably based on the title, that it's a vampire, even though it's broad daylight. But she immediately, instead of dying, like the twist in this one is she kind of like turns directly into like an old woman as we're watching. But then from there, it went like crazy places. Like it introduced Captain Kronos, which I'm sure we'll talk about him in a moment. It introduced the idea of like mesmerism was brought up at one point. I'm just looking through my notes here because it's crazy. There was a bat who attacked a woman. Oh, then there was a creepy brother and sister who apparently are like from some sort of fancy bloodline that they keep talking about, but it's never quite explained who they are, except that they're creepy brother and sister, and they're the ones living in the castle. At one point, I asked myself if I was watching Zorro with vampires because I couldn't figure out what was going on. There was a lot of sword fighting and a lot of horseback riding. Yeah, and then we find out that the creepy brother and sister have a mother, and then like the movie for like the last part of it just delves into their family in the castle, and we'll get there when we talk about the end. But it was wild. It was like they pieced together all these different scripts. And then they were like, we're just going to throw everything into this movie. It reminded me in that way a lot of when I made y'all watch The Terror with Jack Nicholson, if y'all haven't scrubbed that from your memory.
Yes, it definitely had that same feeling, and I completely agree with that assessment that it felt like a different movie every 20 minutes or so, because the tone would shift slightly, you'd be revealed new information plot wise that came out of nowhere. Yeah, I could see a comparison to The Terror. Absolutely.
Yeah, I can too. I think The Terror might have had a more unfinished feel, if that's possible, because it had like 7 directors, but it definitely had a similar feel to that. I share a lot of the same impressions that you guys had. It's hard to kind of find a plot. I mean, I guess the basic plot is that these women are getting bitten by somebody on the mouth, not on the neck, of course. And the Dr. Barkus, is a friend of Captain Kronos because they served some war together. Which Captain Kronos, I guess he's not serving anymore. I guess it's over. I don't know. It's hard to tell. Captain Kronos and his friend Professor Grost are famous vampire hunters, so they come and they give this whole masterclass that makes no sense on all the different kinds of vampires. And then, yeah, like you said, there are kind of these red herrings with the creepy kids and whatnot. And it turns out it was the mom the whole time, which I wondered when we first saw her in the carriage if it was going to be her. I did not expect the father to be brought back from the dead somehow. And I wasn't 100% sure why one time his face was a pincushion, but I don't know. There was a lot that I think may have been in throwaway lines that I just didn't get, because that happened a lot too. Yeah, I knew from reading a description of it that it was going to be kind of a swashbuckling kind of piratey type feel. So I wasn't too thrown off by that. I think the thing that threw me off a little bit was, I'm just looking through my notes and my notes are cracking me up because of the things that I wrote down. I think the thing that kind of threw me off was the treatment of the vampire, because I was completely confused. I mean, I don't know. I completely confused is too strong of a term, but I didn't understand what they were trying to get at with the vampire. I think they were trying to do something different from other vampire movies Hammer had done. Maybe I'm giving them too much credit, but I was confused because they're vampire hunters. So they have garlic all over their carriage and they have all these amazing stakes and hammers and all the stuff that you would think would handle vampires. But then Gross tells us that not all vampires are the same. Some bite you on the neck, some bite you on the mouth. Some don't care about any. These vampires were out in the daytime. They didn't care about garlic. They were attacking women in chapels. They were actually standing in the chapel, as I wrote in my notes. It's a vampire bat hanging on a cross, not affected. Attacking people in chapels, not affected. Knocking over the Lord's Supper, not affected. When attacking the girl, mimicking the cross figure with her arms outstretched, still not affected. Even when Dr. Marcus becomes a vampire, the steel cross on his chest never affects him until Captain Kronos just accidentally pushes a part of it into his chest and then he dies. And so I wasn't sure. It was very confusing to me how these vampires worked and why. I guess the mesmerism makes sense because they got to trick the people into walking toward them so they can attack them. But really, the vampire lore in this movie was totally confusing to me. And I mean, I think it probably was the characters as well because it didn't make a lot of sense. I also wasn't sure about the toad thing where they were constantly throwing toads at people to see if dead toads at people to see if the toad would come to life.
But there was a rhyme that went with it. Did that not explain it?
Well, I mean, it made sense, I suppose, but I mean, I'm no expert on vampire lore, so maybe there is a rhyme that they found. But yeah, it was just stuff like that. I also didn't understand these setting up the strings with bells on them, or why there was a string with a bell in the vampire's house that rang and then the vampire had to stop it. Like,
let's not forget as well.
Yeah.
Let's not forget as well that the string with bells were on a bright red ribbon in the middle of the forest, and went completely unnoticed by the person who was literally inches away from it. That was the part that like this person, it was literally just below eye level, and she was less than a foot away from it, if that. I think she actually brushed it at one point. Yeah.
That's actually, I wrote that down. I said a big red ribbon in the forest with a bell is not exactly a subtle alarm system. The toad thing. So this is the only explanation, listeners, we get for that, is when Kronos says, if a vampire should bestrode close to the grave of a dead toad, then the vampire life shall give, and suddenly the toad shall live.
No, you are forgetting there is a piece of dialogue right after that where, and I can't remember if it's Grost or Kronos who says it, but they say it's an old folk rhyme. Sometimes there's a bit of truth to those, except that in this case, it's 100% true because that's what the rhyme is. So do with that what you will.
Yeah, it was so bizarre. Throwing toads, bright red ribbons. Yeah, for a very because here's the thing, and we need to talk about Kronos here, okay? But he's presented as, I mean, he's the vampire hunter, right? Like he's like our Van Helsing character that's going around saving people, and he even says that when he leaves the movie, like when he makes his exit from the town, he's like, there are people who need me, and I must go help them or whatever. It did seem that they didn't know a lot about what they were doing, and the vampire lore was really messed up. But let's just talk about Kronos a little bit, the character of him, because so he was played by Horace Janssen, who is a German actor, and he's very blonde. For a good portion of the movie, he's either shirtless or in this like puffy shirt, like, I don't know, riding a horse or betting Carolyn Monroe or throwing toads at people in the woods. So I don't know. I'm curious to hear your impressions because we're so used to seeing the Van Helsing character.
I felt like Grost was more the Van Helsing because Grost, I hate, I don't know, don't know how else to put it, but Grost is the brains and Kronos is the brawn. There was a lot of montages where Kronos would be sleeping while Grost was doing all the work because Kronos had to rest himself to be physically able to fight the vampires. There's like a weird montage when they find out about the steel cross where Grost is making the sword into a steel cross while Kronos is like meditating with a sheet over his head and the girl is sitting next to him. And I was just laughing so hard. But I feel like Grost has the knowledge and Kronos is there to stab the vampires.
I have lots of thoughts about that particular scene, like you said about the blacksmithing, because I don't want to go too far into the weeds with it, but that whole sequence just made no sense to me. But in particular, I just wanted to highlight the fact that, like you said, Kronos is sitting kind of in this outdoor common area while Grost is literally blacksmithing a cross from a grave, a metal cross, into a sword. This is a man who, which we have not discussed yet, is a hunchback. So he does have some physical deformity that he's working against. Meanwhile, the svelte, buff, action figure is sitting with a sheet over his head and his hands in a weird position up against his face while his love interest for the time being sits there in this weird state of like staring at him. It's I don't even have words for how bizarre and misogynistic it is at the same time.
I know it's hard to explain it. And also there were weird moments of what I think they meant to be comedy in this movie. And so there's 3 times I think where Caroline Munro is like leaning up against him or sleeping on him or staring at him in weird ways. And then he runs because he's so fast, he's just gone. And she falls over. Or when they're in the bar and the guys are insulting Grost and he fights them, there's like this funny music that starts playing and people get under the bar. So it was like these weird moments where I think they were saying this is supposed to be funny, unlike the serious moments when I was laughing already. But like I didn't, it messed with the tone with me. It wasn't consistent. But I mean, not much was. When you said misogynistic, Matt, it reminded me of when Captain Kronos and Caroline Munro's character Carla are sleeping together. She talks about at one point how rough he is and how he like hurts her when they're intimate and has bitten her mouth. And she asks him why he does this. And instead of answering the question, he starts to like shake her and tell her that the reason he does that to her is because when he got back from going to war, his little sister and mom had been turned into vampires. And his little sister bit him and he had to stake them. And therefore he can like do whatever he wants. And I was so confused by this. I didn't understand how that was a justification for anything. And then we find out later that, apparently he just didn't become a vampire when his little sister bit him because, was it, Kronos says Dr. Marcus will survive his vampire bite. And Gross says he's not as much of a man as you are, Kronos. He'll succumb. So apparently Kronos is just so manly and heroic and just amazing that vampires can't even turn him.
That was the part in the movie that I just lost it because I thought they are pushing. And I know this was 1974. Like, I understand that it's completely a different time. But just how hard they were pushing for Kronos to be like the manly hero of this movie. So, he not only had to sleep with the most beautiful woman, in the village, which by the way, Caroline Munro is stunning in this movie. Like, I could watch her the entire movie. In fact, I was mad when she wasn't on screen in this because she was just beautiful to watch. And I was sad that, I don't know, she got a sword at one point, I think. But for the most part, she was just, her role in the movie was just to like hang on Kronos and to like cry, because even when he leaves her, he like holds out his hand in this weird way, like he's gonna take her hand, because he says something, I mean, kind of nice. He says, you know, when I'm out there like helping people and I'm alone, I'm gonna think about you, or something along those lines. And then he reaches out his hand, like he's going to take her hand and they're going to have like a tender moment. And she kind of like leans forward, like she's going to take his hand, but then he like pulls it back really quickly and is like, aha, never mind.
Yeah, he just grabs the reins. It was like a down low, like high five type thing. Yeah.
Yeah, it was weird. But yeah, they push very hard for him to be like this manly hero. And yet half the time he's running around looking like an extra from Pirates of the Caribbean. And I don't know. But yeah, when he said that he didn't turn vampire because he's too manly, or I guess he didn't say it, his buddy did, but still, it was the same thing. I just lost it, because I was like, of course, that's like the ultimate in macho man talk is, you know, I'm so manly. Even a vampire bite won't turn me.
Yes, because as we all know, it's sheer force of will and masculinity in all vampire lore.
That is how monsters work, Matt.
Noted. I did also just want to say, though, that too, and I want to give credit to my wife as well, because she kept saying this throughout the movie. Not that I didn't notice it as well, but Carolyn Monroe's character, in most cases, when they were seated or sleeping, was in some sort of like subservient position to him. Like she was below him and like looking up at him in this like beatific sort of way. So yeah, the misogyny doth run deep there a bit. And Captain Kronos, not the most, I mean, I felt like of all the people who were running around shirtless, he didn't need to be one of them personally. Like he wasn't like, I don't know. Anyway.
No, weren't impressed by his massive scar, because that's how Dr. Marcus knew he had guts, because he saw them.
I did find that line hilarious, but I was not impressed by his sunken in chest that was constantly being bared.
Well, kind of, I guess, in comparison, because I mean, we could keep talking about Kronos. I agree with you, Matt. I don't think he was the eye candy of this movie. I think that was Carolyn Monroe. And I'm not saying that to like belittle her at all. I found her, again, just very stunning on the screen. Can we talk about the brother and sister? Because they show up. I feel like they show up about halfway through the movie. I didn't write exactly when. There had already been several deaths before they showed up. Kronos had already met Carolyn Monroe. We'd already seen him shirtless. There was already that sword fight in the tavern.
They had shown up just briefly before then.
In the cemetery. Yeah, in the cemetery.
And you see the brother with the stagecoach and his ailing mother, and there's a brief description of it. None of it makes sense because it's all just sort of thrown in there briefly until you get to like the longer scenes with them towards the end of the movie. Because I kept wondering, who the heck are these people and what are they doing and why does this matter? Because it would just randomly show up for a scene that was just sort of like shoved in there, and then they'd be gone for like 20 more minutes.
That makes sense to me. Why I didn't realize that they were, but yeah, about halfway through the movie they show up. The Derwins, that's all we pretty much get from them. Paul and Sarah, I think, were the brother and sister's name. But did anybody else get just a weird incestuous vibe with them? Like, I kept expecting this to go full on like Fall of the House of Usher, because I don't know.
That is exactly what I thought. I thought they were like the Wish version of Roderick and Madeline Usher, not nearly as interesting or as, I guess, deep. And I did want to say this too. This is actually going back to some conversation that we'd had a little while ago about them. This is where I thought that the plot with them was leading. I thought when they first show up and it's the young brother and the mother in the stagecoach, and then later on we randomly meet him and his sister, I thought they were going for the implication that his sister was also his mother, she was the vampire, and so that she was aging, and when she had not fed, he was using the ruse that she was his mother, and then when she had fed and was youthful, she was his sister again. But that was
Oh,
just kind of
interesting.
the implication that I got from it. But
That would have been a
this
better
was
movie.
it was a very interesting idea that I think was definitely implied, but implied is too strong of a word. Vaguely gestured towards would be better. Vaguely gestured towards in the dark with fog would be even better, because it was like, like there was nothing that concrete that ever said that, but I thought it was an interesting idea. So, but they never really explored that. There was just a lot of half finished ideas, I think, with this movie.
I wondered if Sarah was the vampire, but was feeding gradually on the mom. So she was aging the mom, but not killing her and keeping herself young and then going after the other people. But yeah, it turns out that the kids were totally innocent. They were just creepy. I wondered about the Roderick Madeline thing. I didn't go so far as to think of incest because they just, I don't know. I mean, maybe with the brother, but Sarah was so oblivious to everything. She didn't even know anything about their family folklore. I wondered why she was. I mean, this is fine. I don't care. But I wondered if they were hinting at something in the fact that in I think almost the entire movie, but at least most of it, she was dressed in trousers and high boots and a man's jacket and had really short hair. I wondered, I don't know, it was weird. It was kind of like they were trying to make them look like twins, but they like weren't. And they were dressing alike. And I wondered if they were going to do something with that, or if she was dressing that way so she could attack people more easily. But they never did. It was just like a sartorial choice. Like there was no explanation of anything, really.
There wasn't. Yeah, the sister did seem oddly out of it. I wasn't sure what was going on with that. Her brother kept like touching her face, which I think is where I was just like, this is weird and creepy. They were very obsessed with their family line and their blood. Like that was one of the things I really couldn't figure out, because from the very beginning, like, oh, well, Matt, as you said, when we get a real extended scene with them, not, I guess, from the beginning of when we see them, but, they're in their home talking about their mother and I guess how she's not doing well. And like, rather being concerned about their mother's declining health, they were seemed more concerned that, or the daughter did at least, that, aren't you worried like the same thing's going to happen to us, type of thing. And he kept saying, no, we're Derwins. Mother's not. She married into the family. She doesn't have Derwin blood, but we do. And I kept wanting to know like what was so special. And it turns out nothing is special about their bloodline. I mean, at least that the movie didn't give me a satisfactory answer, but like brother was obsessed with that.
He was. And it turned out, though, that the mother's bloodline, the Karsteins, were the ones that had all the supernatural powers and apparently could, like, raise people from the dead and whatnot. Which Karstein, I think, was maybe a name from, I don't know, it sounds familiar to me, like it was from a Gothic novel or a vampire thing or something.
I'm looking that up because that was very.
Was it Karstein and Camilla, or am I thinking of.
You know what? I don't know.
Oh, well.
It has been so long since I've read Carmilla that I couldn't tell you if it is or not. But I did think it was funny that, yeah, after they had made such a big deal about there was a Karn. I think there
In
was a
other Hammer
Karnstein.
movies, there was a Karnstein, so it might be coming from Carmilla.
I think. Feel
Which
like
is
that's
interesting.
right.
If it is, that's an interesting gesture.
Well, hold on, I'm looking this up because this is gonna. It would be a really interesting gesture, but I just thought it was funny that like after the brother had been, because I thought that was kind of cruel to say about your own mother, just to basically say that she wasn't worth anything because she wasn't part of like the best bloodline that came around, and then
Interesting, because she's like the big bad. I mean, if you're thinking, it's the mom who's the one who's tricked everybody and has the amazing bloodline and is the vampire and brings the dad back and does all this.
Yeah, vampires can do a lot in this movie. I hesitate to. I couldn't even get the word movie out. It was like a fever dream. I don't know what I watched.
In this fever dream.
A lot of weirdly staged swashbuckling at the end of the movie.
Oh yeah, where the
That is something
corpse
that
is
you
fighting
watch.
with Kronos. Yeah.
Yes, it was very awkwardly staged. Also, the awkwardly staged fight scene where he disarms all of the peasants and they just go away. They think that he's killed Dr. Marcus. They come to kill him. This is while he and uh, God, what's the Hunchback? Gorst, right?
Grossed.
Grost. He and Grost are literally stealing a headstone from a cemetery because it has a cross on it. The villagers show up, say nothing. He fights them all and disarms them all, and then leaves. And like, there's nary a word spoken, and the only soundtrack is what I can only describe as an 8-year-old with a trumpet.
Yeah, and while he's disarming all of them, Grost and Carla are watching and smiling. And then when he finishes by injuring all their hands, as he disarms them, their swords fly toward the camera and like stick in the ground. And then he turns away, and Carla and Grost laugh very forced, like ha 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 ha, at these poor people who think he murdered someone. And he gets on the wagon and winks at them, and then they all drive away laughing. It was so awkward.
Yeah. Okay. So I think I've cracked this. All right. As y'all were talking. So first of all, Carmilla, I had to look it up because, like I said, it has been a while since I've read Carmilla. But she was, when she's revealed, like her other identity is revealed, and she's Merkala. She's the Countess Karnstein. So they did pull that directly from Carmilla, which I agree with you is really interesting. And now I'm wondering if they had two different people at Hammer. One who is like, I've been reading Carmilla and I'd love to do a female vampire. I'd love to make a film about, like, maybe she's a descendant of Carmilla's or something along those lines. And then another guy at Hammer was just like, yeah, and can we add pirates?
Well, they do have Vampire Lovers, which was a retelling of Carmilla, and I did a quick Google search about Karnstein, and there was something called the Karnstein trilogy where there were women vampires. So maybe they wanted to hook Kronos to those because they leave it open at the end that there could be a sequel.
Yeah, maybe.
I mean, I don't know that it worked very well, but I wonder if that was the concept.
I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I'm struggling really to think about what was going through their minds too much when they were doing this film, because I don't know.
Now I wonder if she's mentioned in the Karnstein trilogy, because I don't think I've seen any of the movies in it. I'm going to have to take a rest, I think, before I watch any more. But yeah, I don't know. It's definitely an interesting gesture. I definitely think that. I'm just not sure what to do with it right now.
No, and then not like, now that I've put that, because I was so thrown off by, honestly, brother and sister, and knowing that they were innocent in all this too, because I was like, how are we not going to learn that they're up to creepy stuff? But really, all they were guilty of, I guess, is being weird. Like, I'm just wondering why they decided to make her the interesting vampire. Like, I don't know, like, because we don't even see her until the very end. Like, it's just, I don't know. It's just, it's weird. It's disappointing. And then knowing now that they obviously, like, pulled that from it, yeah, it's a little frustrating. They did turn this, like, they did this with a lot of Hammer over the years, but I think this has been adapted into several different comic books. Some that were, like, anthologized, like, the House of Hammer, but I think it got its own out a few years ago called Captain Kronos Vampire Hunter, and I'm curious to know if any of this was, like, addressed.
Did it make any sense?
Right.
Or did they just give a bunch of writers and artists some drugs and say, here?
See what you can do with this. I just want to throw out there, like, this is kind of not related to anything, so we can go back to our topic. But when the poor innocent kid, we find out they were just creepy and weird. They're innocent when they're in trances and frozen. So everybody at the end of the movie, when the big sword fight happens, everybody is in a trance, so that
that's
they can have their fight.
That's the part we left out. We totally glossed over the fact that he put a shiny metal thing over part of the blade of the sword forged from the cross, so that he held it up to his eyes so that they reflected back to the vampire mother's eyes, and she mesmerized herself.
Like Medusa.
Yeah.
But Kronos, our hero, used Sarah, the daughter who was frozen at the time and didn't even know what was going on, as a human shield at one point. And I was like, dude, you are the hero. And we now know the kids are innocent. And he's like using the daughter to protect himself from the father, like swinging the rapier at him when he's disarmed.
He was an odd hero. Like he did some. I mean, everything that we're saying about this guy, like he's not a very honorable person at all. And I'm not sure, honestly, if like his whole mission was to like ride through the countryside and save people. I'm not sure how many people he saved.
That's a good question, because a lot of people died while he was running around, and he almost didn't save Carla, except that the mom wanted to save Carla for the father. The only people in the movie he seemed to really love and care about were Dr. Marcus and Ghost. Like, he didn't even want to kill Dr. Marcus when Dr. Marcus became a vampire, but he had no trouble, being violent toward Carla and picking out Vampire Mom.
And Marcus... Oh, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say he didn't want to kill Marcus, but he had no problem like hanging him while he didn't die.
I was just about to ask that. Like, he first of all, when Marcus wakes up and like realizes what has happened, he like looks in the mirror and like, okay, this movie was doing like, it tried to do some really interesting things, I think, with like beauty standards and the way we treat aging, because the whole movie started with like the girls looking in the mirror and like giggling, and then they're saying, oh, remember, it's a sin to be vain, and then clearly that's what's driving Lady Derwin, who's really Lady Karnstein, I guess, the whole film. But we just learned it at the end, is that she's trying to like stay young and beautiful. And then Marcus, when he realizes he's turning or he's turned, or I don't even know if they have like a terminology for what is going on in this film. The vampire lore is so like nebulous, but he wakes up and he looks in the mirror and he's like, I'm younger, So he like flips out and he immediately goes and runs to Kronos, who, if I'm remembering right, is still like wrapped in bed sheets with Carolyn Monroe's character. Carla, I think was her name. And he sees the blood on his friend's lip. And then at that moment, like, he just punches him. Like, he just like pulls his hand back and just lets this guy have it, and then drags him across the ground. And I was just like, he turned violent so quickly when his friend wasn't trying to attack him. His friend was like coming to him for help. But we do have to talk about the killing scene of Marcus, because I think this was probably one of the scenes that earned it the rating it got at the time. Because now we can kind of laugh at some of the things that were happening, but like, this was one of those scenes where Marcus just wouldn't die. And Kronos was just like, okay, that didn't work. Let's try something else now. And they just went through, I want to say, like 3 different ways of trying to kill him before, as Mel said earlier, they just accidentally stumble on how to kill him. I was shocked at how like easily breezily he took to killing his friend multiple times with not an emotion on his face.
Yeah, I could see that. But I don't know. Gross had to really. I mean, Marcus had to scream "kill me" over and over again, and Gross, because he even said Marcus will do like me and just not become a vamp, even though he saw the teeth when Marcus was coming at him. He at first he doesn't believe it's going to happen, and then Gross kind of has to talk him into it. But you're right. As it goes on, he just gets more and more into it, to the point where when he survives the hanging and he's watching, there was this totally cheesy, corny moment when Marcus is alive and he literally is like, "Oh darn," and like shakes his fist. Yeah, it was weird. It was again that tone where it was almost like they were trying to put something comic into something where it should not have been. Yeah.
Yeah, it was odd, and I mean they did because they tried to impale him first, then they bring out the noose and they try to hang him, and the hanging goes on for a second. Like we see him in shadow fighting that, and then he still survives. Yeah, it was weird. There was weird moments of humor, which normally I don't mind that if the humor can break the tension, but it didn't in this scene. Like, I'm not sure there was tension to be broken, considering how much. I mean, we were watching a guy being murdered multiple times.
I feel like it should have been tense, not attention breaking.
Yeah, yeah. It was bizarre. It was bizarre. Well, I don't know. I am, a little bit. I don't know if I can talk about Captain Kronos much longer. My question is, because the way they build Kronos up to be this like uber masculine hero, the man so manly that he can have vampires biting him and he won't turn just out of like sheer stubbornness of will, or I don't know, whatever. So they built him up as this hero. And then I was looking at the tagline of the movie. The tagline of the movie is "the only man alive feared by the walking dead." So, and then it's this like ridiculous picture of him with like a Zorro cape, flapping in the wind behind him, and he's holding up a sword. And then he leaves. When he leaves Carla behind and says he's going to go on, like, I'm wondering, do you think they intended, like, if this was a giant hit, that there was going to be a, Kronos 2 and a Kronos 3, and then we were going to have all these Kronos films? Do you think they were setting it up that way? Or I don't know.
I mean, I have no evidence for this other than what was in the movie, but I felt like they were trying to set up some sort of sequel. Yeah, I definitely did.
Yeah, like I said, I don't know. I don't think I could take another Kronos movie, but
I
I
don't know
guess
if
they
the
can't all be
world
winners.
could.
That's true. Maybe it's a good thing that he was like relegated to comics. I am curious about what happens in the comics, especially the ones that are pretty recent, because I would love to see what like kind of a contemporary take on somebody like him would be, because I imagine it could be kind of fun to see that version. I definitely don't want to see this version again, and I'm gonna have to go out and watch some like decent Hammer horror now just to like cleanse my brain of this. But I don't know. Well, I guess that's a good place for us to take us out. I know that just from all three of us that we are very thankful that you listened to this episode. If you've watched Captain Kronos, Vampire Hunter, we would absolutely love to hear your opinion on that. I feel like there's got to be a group of people out there who just gets together with their friends and will watch Captain Kronos. It seems like it would be a quotable movie, especially if maybe there were drinks involved. I don't know. But if you have watched it before, or if you watched it, after you listen to this episode and you want to share your thoughts, you can do that. We are at No Fearcast on Twitter and Instagram. We also have a Facebook page. If you'd like to contact us by email, and we love getting emails, send us one at nofearcast@gmail.com. If you love what we're doing, consider supporting us on Patreon. You can get access to exclusive content, and that includes episodes that are in the weeks in between these main episodes. Or you can simply rate and review us, which is entirely free, but it helps us just a lot. So it always helps with those algorithms, the more reviews we get. This episode was, I feel like we would normally say was researched by Lisa, Matt, and Mel, but there was no research in this. There was just a lot of head pounding against while we were watching this movie. It was painful at times. Thanks for listening. We'll be back in 2 weeks with a brand new episode.